Hi, I'm Michael.
Hi, I'm Ifra.
We're going to have a little discussion about some research methods.
Hey, Michael, I have a question for you. I hear you have a course in the works that's about methods. Can you tell me why methods matter?
Sure. I think that research methods matter because health equity matters, and we want the best evidence possible so that we can be sure we know how to improve health and not make mistakes and not waste money. We all know there's plenty of skeptical people out there about our work, so we want to be as rigorous as possible.
Okay, so I heard the word rigorous. Now I have an example, real world example that I'd like your thoughts on, okay?
Great.
So let's say we want to compare northern Baton Rouge to southern Baton Rouge and kind of figure out, why health outcomes are different. How would you go about that in a rigorous way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we take an example of one part of a city and another part of a city, or maybe even two cities. And we observe through data that one has better health than the other. Well, clearly that's a fact. One has better health than the other. But we ask the question, why? Then we're going to be interested in what are the drivers of those health, of that health. And so then we want to figure out, well, is there a different kind of people? Maybe athletes in one area, Colorado, and then non-athletes in someplace else, in Massachusetts. And so we're sort of comparing apples and oranges. So our goal with a rigorous methodology is to make sure we're comparing apples and apples and make sure that we're comparing with the proper statistics or metrics. So we're always comparing the right comparisons.
Great. So that sounds lovely, but a lot of us, we're doers. We've been implementing programs in our communities for a long time. We've lived the experience, and sometimes what we think we'll find out may not really ring true with what we believe to be true.
Yeah.
So how do we work around things like that?
That's a really good question. So I know that a lot of us in IRL are doing wonderful things in the community, and we don't want to be shown that what we're doing is not effective. So this is a great ethical dilemma. What I think, and what you and I have talked about in the past, is sort of wearing two hats. One hat being the community organizer or activist. And in this role, we're trying to do the best thing we can for our community members. The other role might be one of a researcher or scientist or evaluator. In that role, we want to see what works and why. Now let's just imagine that I evaluated your community intervention program and said, Ifrit, you're not having the effect that you thought you were. You might despair and say, oh my gosh, I should not do anything. I'd recommend something else entirely. First, let's see if what we studied was rigorous. Second, if we do see it doesn't have the effect, we might ask why. So it's not throwing the baby in the bathwater, it's figuring out what's working and what's not. And then, of course, we have an opportunity to do something new to be even more effective. And I dare say going back to a philanthropy foundation for more resources to do it better.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned philanthropists and such. Increasingly, governments and foundations want us to produce evidence-based research. And research, just like, everything else human, is not perfect. And so how do you work around some of those, just kind of our need to kind of perfect things and find the answers we want? How do we work against that?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. I think that our goal is to be as rigorous as possible under resource constraints. So we do what we can given what we have. Some studies will lend themselves to more rigorous methods. Some studies are more challenging, and they're all under some kind of constraint. So I think the keys are transparency, but also a keen eye to what we might call dissemination or scientific communication. Because there will be skeptics. And so we want to tailor how we frame our story of the work to the audience. So a policymaker might hear one version. It's not a lie, it's just helping the policymaker and her understanding. Another for community members, and another for, say, a scientific journal. All the same facts, but tailored for different ways. It gets especially challenging when we're doing things like qualitative or ethnographic research, which doesn't always fit in the traditional research paradigm.
And so, obviously, a mini course like this, you can't teach everything. What other opportunities does IRL provide to kind of engage in ongoing improvement in our research?
Right. So this course that we're about to watch is designed to, for some, be a little refresher, for others to be new, but overall so that we all have a common language so we can discuss stuff in our program. Of course, we have many other courses, those in qualitative research, those in dissemination, and many others for the IRL fellows to hopefully improve, get better, and build a culture of health.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. Let's watch the course. Hi, welcome. I'm Michael Oakes. As you probably know, I'm the director of the IRL program. And today, we're going to talk about some issues with respect to science and research. One of these little mini webinars we're doing, one of these web courses. This is obviously a daunting topic, and I think what we've learned from the past few years is that when we talk about science and research with respect to our community-engaged, action-oriented research, the fundamental idea is this is difficult stuff. So not only is some of this research discussion difficult on its own, but I think it's really true that the integration of some of these ideas of science and statistics and counterfactuals and so forth, how we integrate them into the IRL family of action-oriented community-engaged research makes it especially difficult. So this video, this class, is designed to hopefully bring some ideas, make them more palatable for you, engage, sort of clean up some ideas so that we can all go forward with a common language. That's the goal. One of the prime themes of all of this work is something I hold very dearly, and I think you do too, that efforts for health equity and other such research is very important. In my view, this work we're all collectively doing is much too important to be sloppy in our thinking. So rigorous, if you will, scientific methods, rigorous thinking, clarity on all these aspects, clarity and dissemination is absolutely vital to get it right. And so one thing, again, we're doing with this video today is to clarify our thinking so we're all on the same page. It can be difficult for researchers such as you who care deeply about the topic of interest. I know from your interviews that all of you are deeply interested in changing the world for the better, to improve health equity, to improve the health of population, and certainly disadvantaged groups. Nevertheless, I want to suggest to you that when it comes to the moment of our research, we want to put our research hat on and be what I call passionately dispassionate. That is, we don't want to have our personal hopes and dreams and biases infect our research and somehow undermine it. As you know, there'll be plenty of people who want to discount all the work we collectively do, say it's not valid, say it's not good enough, and so any threat to validity can be a big threat to our entire collective project. So, this is a moment to put on your researcher hat, whether you're a researcher or a community member, and try to be as dispassionate, as rigorous, as clear as you possibly can. To that end, I'd like to share with you an old fable, an old story that was taught to me when I was in graduate school many years ago now. It's a story of a man who's imprisoned in the middle of a desert, and it's just a joke. And so the story is that the man is imprisoned in a desert, and there's sort of very loose walls and not much of a gate, and another older man is also in that desert prison. Well, the younger man escapes, and he runs away, and the older man doesn't know where he is. Several days go by, and finally the guards bring the younger man back, dehydrated, sunburned, and all such things. The older man says to the younger man, "I knew you'd be back." And the younger guy says, "How did you know?" And the older man says, "There's no escape." And the younger guy says, "How do you know?" And the older man said, "I've tried to escape 5 times." And the younger man says, "Why didn't you tell me?" And the older guy says, "Because who wants to publish negative results?" The point of this, hopefully joke for you as well, is that sometimes negative findings, sometimes saying that this program didn't work, is so valuable to us. It can do 2 things. It can say we should shift our resources elsewhere to something more productive, or improve our methodology, or of course, related to that, is to improve the intervention or the work we're doing together. But if we pretend something's working and it's not, if we're not dispassionate about our research, we can get into all kinds of trouble. Another point I want to talk about is the issue of causality. Does some intervention X cause some change in the outcome of Y, some health variable, whether it's reduction in anxiety or maybe reduction in cancer risk, whatever it might be. For far too long, people doing statistical work and people doing research were really loath, really against talking about causality. Those times are changing, and there's an interesting sort of story about why no one wanted to talk about causality. And in my opinion, my read of the scholarship historically, it was sort of a sour grapes story, which is to say the old fable of the fox who really wanted those grapes but couldn't get them because there was a fence between him and the grapes. So the fox decides he doesn't really want the grapes because he can't get them, to avoid what's called cognitive dissonance. The same thing I think happens in our research together. That is, people know that proving causality is very difficult, very daunting. So instead of saying, let's embrace that, let's lean in, let's find out what we need to do to show cause and what assumptions we need to make to show cause, instead they'll want to say, let's ignore cause altogether and talk about things like associations and correlations only. But when we're doing health equity work, we're trying to say this intervention to help children or any other group we're interested in improves health. That's a causal question. And so what I'd like to say to you is embrace cause, lean in, and hopefully some of the concepts and tools from this class can help you in that endeavor. Finally, one last thing about sort of this framework. So often the research that's been done and some of the research you've done and I've done certainly is focused on an individual devoid of context, sort of some person without political, historical, trauma context of various forms. We don't imagine they have friends and social networks and such things. This is in fact how many statistical models operate. Some of you might remember that old IID assumption, independent, identically distributed data from your biostats or stats courses early on. Well, that's just saying that people don't interact. But people do interact, and you and I know it. So this is just I guess a sketch, a drawing, a painting of Robinson Crusoe. Robinson Crusoe, of course, is the old fictional story of a man on an island without social circumstances. And so the only thing that affects Robinson is his genes and perhaps stubbing a toe or getting a cut on maybe a shell on the beach or something. But that's not how most health works in modern society. It's a function of social issues, economic context, historical racism, and so forth. These social forces are what drive so much of health today, as you quite well know. So we want to have methods that incorporate this social interaction. And you'll see some of that in this course today, and I hope you go further with it yourself.